The moment the collision happened, the entire rhythm of the match seemed to fracture into something tense, uncertain, and deeply controversial, as Luke Jacobson launched into contact with Josh van der Flier, a split-second decision that would go on to ignite one of the most heated debates in recent international rugby, and long after the whistle had blown, long after the crowd had dispersed, the conversation refused to die, echoing through studios, columns, and dressing rooms, because what unfolded on that field was not just another refereeing decision but a moment that forced the rugby world to confront its own evolving standards around player safety, intent, and accountability, and at the center of it all stood former Test referee Owen Doyle, whose reaction captured the disbelief of many when he described the decision as shocking. A word that carried weight not just because of his experience but because it reflected a wider frustration shared by those who understand the game. At its deepest levels, and as messages flooded his phone from seasoned rugby minds, all asking the same question, why was this not a red card, there was a sense that something fundamental had been missed in real time, something that went beyond technical interpretation and entered the realm of instinctive judgment, where player welfare is supposed to come first. As the replay loops began to circulate, the images only intensified the scrutiny, showing Luke Jacobson approaching the breakdown with speed, his body height rising at the last moment, his shoulder tucked in a way that narrowed his margin for error, and then the contact itself, abrupt and jarring, connecting with the head of Josh van der Flier, whose reaction told its own story, as he recoiled from the force of the hit. And while rugby has always been a collision sport defined by physical intensity, moments like these are no longer judged solely on impact but on responsibility, and that is where the controversy deepened, because even though referee Nic Berry initially missed the full severity of the incident, it was picked up by TMO Ben Whitehouse, bringing it back into focus and forcing a decision that would ultimately shape the narrative of the entire match, and yet when the yellow card was shown, there was an immediate sense among many observers that the punishment did not align with the perceived level of danger. For Owen Doyle, this disconnect was impossible to ignore, and in his detailed analysis, he pointed to what he described as a high degree of danger, emphasizing that the contact was not only direct but forceful, involving the head, which under current frameworks is supposed to trigger the most serious level of scrutiny, and his frustration was not rooted in hindsight but in principle, because the modern game has made it clear that any action involving head contact must be assessed with the utmost caution, and yet in this case, the threshold for a red card seemed to have been overlooked, or perhaps interpreted in a way that left too much room for ambiguity, and this is where the debate becomes even more complex, because rugby's laws are not static, they evolve, and recent changes introduced by World Rugby have attempted to strike a balance between maintaining the physical essence of the sport and protecting players from long-term harm. Those changes, particularly the introduction of the 20-minute red card concept, were designed to differentiate between deliberate foul play and what might be considered technical errors, and in theory, this framework should provide clarity, but in practice, it often introduces new layers of interpretation, as seen in this very incident, where Luke Jacobson's actions were ultimately categorized as falling short of the most severe level of sanction, despite the visual evidence suggesting otherwise to many, and when the decision was passed to the foul play review officer, there was an expectation among viewers that the outcome might be upgraded, that the bunker system would act as a corrective mechanism, ensuring that no critical detail was missed, but when Andrew Jackson reviewed the footage and concluded that there was sufficient mitigation, citing the involvement of James Ryan in what he described as a jam on the arm of the All Blacks flanker, the reaction was immediate and intense, because for many, this explanation seemed disconnected from the reality of the footage. The idea that James Ryan's involvement could significantly alter the responsibility of Luke Jacobson became one of the most debated aspects of the decision, with critics arguing that the primary duty of care always lies with the tackler, regardless of external factors, and that mitigation should not be used as a convenient pathway to reduce sanctions in cases where head contact is clear and dangerous. And this is where Owen Doyle's comments resonated so strongly, because he questioned not just the outcome but the reasoning behind it, suggesting that the decision-making process itself had become inconsistent, and in a sport that prides itself on clarity and fairness, inconsistency can be more damaging than the decision itself, because it erodes trust among players, coaches, and fans alike. Meanwhile, the All Blacks camp, led by Dave Rennie, found themselves navigating a delicate situation, balancing support for their player with an acknowledgement of the broader conversation, and while some critics labeled the incident as a brain explosion, a moment of reckless judgment under pressure, Dave Rennie pushed back against that characterization, offering a more measured perspective that framed the collision as an unfortunate outcome rather than an intentional act, and this distinction is crucial in modern rugby, where intent plays a significant role in disciplinary outcomes, yet it also raises questions about whether intent should outweigh consequence when it comes to player Safety, especially in high-speed collisions where the margin for error is razor-thin. As the days passed and it became clear that Luke Jacobson would not face further sanction, the debate only intensified, because the citing commissioner's decision not to intervene effectively closed the door on any retrospective punishment, leaving many to wonder whether an opportunity had been missed to reinforce the standards that the game has been trying to establish. And this is not an isolated issue, as recent weeks have seen other incidents, including headbutts that resulted in suspensions, highlighting a pattern where disciplinary outcomes can vary significantly depending on interpretation, context, and sometimes even timing, and for fans, this inconsistency can be difficult to reconcile, particularly when similar actions appear to receive different levels of punishment. In the broader context of international rugby, moments like this carry weight far beyond a single match, because they influence how the game is perceived, how players adjust their techniques, and how referees approach future decisions. And the role of technology, from TMOs to bunker reviews, was supposed to bring greater accuracy and fairness, yet it also introduces new points of contention, as every angle, every frame, can be analyzed and debated, often leading to more questions than answers. And in this case, the technology did its job in identifying the incident, but the interpretation that followed remains at the heart of the controversy. For Josh van der Flier, the incident was another reminder of the risks that come with competing at the highest level, where physicality is unavoidable but protection must be prioritized, and while he continued on, the focus quickly shifted away from the immediate impact and toward the long-term implications of decisions like this, because each ruling sets a precedent, shaping how similar situations will be handled in the future. And this is why voices like Owen Doyle's are so important, not because they provide definitive answers, but because they challenge the system to reflect, to reassess, and to improve. And as the rugby world continues to debate what should have happened in that moment, one thing remains clear: the conversation is far from over, because at its core, this is not just about Luke Jacobson or Josh van der Flier, or even Nic Berry and Andrew Jackson. It is about the direction of the sport itself, about how it balances tradition with responsibility, intensity with safety, and interpretation with consistency. And until those elements are aligned, moments like this will continue to spark controversy, forcing everyone involved to confront the difficult questions that define the modern game.